Well, thank you very much for joining me in this video. You know, the content of my tips and techniques videos that I do each Monday generally comes from inquiries I get from the agents, and that's the case again today. I received essentially the same question from two different agents, independent of each other, the same day last week. What they asked me was this. They said, look, when we go to take a listing, are we covered for any kind of exposure we might have because we put a lockbox on the property or because we're holding open houses? That's an excellent question. And the first place we need to look to answer that question is the listing form. And I want to draw your attention to number 8 on the listing form. This is what it says. The seller will not hold the listing brokerage and representatives of the brokerage responsible for any loss or damage to the property or contents occurring during the term of this agreement caused by the listing brokerage or anyone else by any means, including theft, fire, vandalism, other than by the listing brokerage's gross negligence or willful act. And then it goes on to say the seller warrants the property is insured, including personal liability insurance against any claims or lawsuits resulting from bodily injury or property damage to others caused in any way on or at the property. And the seller indemnifies the brokerage and all of its employees, representatives, salespersons, and brokers, listing brokerage, and any cooperating brokerage and all of its employees, representatives, salespersons, and brokers for any or against any claim against the listing brokerage or the cooperating brokerage made by anybody who attends or visits the property. So we've got an indemnification from the seller. And what does the indemnification cover? Well, let's suppose goods are stolen during an open house. Let's suppose that a thief scopes out the property because of a virtual tour that's made available online. Let's suppose you're showing the property and a buyer looks over your shoulder and watches what the code is when you open the lockbox. They come back later unattended. Let's suppose a client slips in the ice when they're attending an open house. Or maybe they fall down the basement stairs and they sue the seller. Without this indemnification, the seller would third party the agent. They'd say, well, it might have happened, but I relied on the agent and he's the one that had the open house. He's the one that showed the property, etc., etc. They can't. And all these things happen. Believe me, we had a lot of them happen over a period of time. We've had items that are stolen. We've had items where the seller says they were damaged. In one case, they claimed that a model ship was damaged during a showing, and the repair bill was $8,000. Another occasion, potential buyer was emphatic that they wanted to go up into the attic. They said they were very comfortable doing it. They went up in the attic. They stepped between two joists and fell right through the ceiling back down to the floor again. Great big gaping hole in the ceiling and injury to the buyer. There was a period of time when during an open house, it was a terrible inclement day, snowstorm, and a family showed up and the elderly mother was in a walker. Well, she slipped and fell on the ice, broke her hip. They sued the seller. Seller, under normal circumstances, would third party the agent. They couldn't with this indemnification, and the courts threw it out because they said people were out of their minds to take the lady out in that kind of weather. Another case where a client wanted to go down the stairs. The agent said, you know, there's no handrail, be careful. Well, they fell ass over tea kettle down the stairs and injured themselves. So all these things are covered on the indemnification. What's not covered is gross negligence and willful acts. What do we mean by that? Gross negligence is a difficult one because at what stage does negligence become gross negligence? The agent forgets to lock the door. They put the key back in the key box, but they forget to lock the door, so the door's unlocked. That might be negligence. But if somebody drives by and the door is wide open so you can see right through into the house, maybe that's gross negligence. At least that may be something that would be argued by the seller. And of course, willful acts, you decide to take the key and give it to somebody else unlawfully, and they turn out to be a thief or know a thief, and that'd be willful act. So there's some protection and there's some danger, but the question is that good enough? Is what's incorporated in the listing form good enough to cover lockboxes and open houses? Well, it can be argued, but one thing that can't be argued is Tress's requirement. If you look at Bulletin 7-2, it requires express written consent for lockboxes. What it states is lockboxes are to be installed only with the seller's written consent. And we take a look at the listing form again, and we say, is the seller giving express written consent to put a lockbox on? What it says under number 6, under marketing, it says the seller further agrees that the listing brokerage shall have sole and exclusive authority to make all advertising decisions related to the marketing of the property for sale during the listing period. And you can argue, well, one of the things that's my decision to help market the property is a lockbox. Another one of my decisions to help market the property is an open house. And at my sole and absolute discretion, I'm doing it, and the seller's giving me express consent. Well, if you read down on the same bulletin 7.2, it also says this: agents must fully explain the risks to the seller before a lockbox may be installed. And of course, you can say, well, I explained it to them. They say, well, you never talked to me about that. And there's a problem. It's he said, she said, and so it better be in writing. So I contacted Aria and I said, near as I can tell, in the listing form, there's no reference where the seller gives express consent for open house and for lockbox. Is there a reason for that? And they said, well, gosh, no, not really, but you can make up your own. Well, I did have one, and I shared it with these two agents, and I want to share it with you. And it was a consent form. It was a consent form by the seller consenting to lockboxes and consenting to open houses. I did the lockbox to comply with TRESA, and I did open house to also give protection to the agent. And it seems a little bit onerous, but it says to explain all the risks. So listen to what it says in this consent form. Under lockboxes, while the use of a lockbox is strongly encouraged in the marketing of the home, the homeowner needs to be aware that there are certain potential risks to the use of a lockbox, which include, but are not limited to, and then I list 3 or 4 of them. I say the lockbox could conceivably be broken into to gain access to the property, which could result in the theft or damage of the property. An unauthorized person could somehow use the lockbox to enter the property by gaining access to the code. Keys may be lost, or the lockbox may be improperly closed, allowing unauthorized access to the property. And then we go on and say, use of a lockbox on the property could affect coverage under the seller's property insurance policy. Sellers are encouraged to contact their property insurer to ensure continued coverage. So we've covered the dangers, the exposure of a lockbox. Then we went on to open houses. Similar thing. We've said when a house is held open, the viewer is typically unknown to the salesperson that's on duty. And while a registrant, salesperson, will be in attendance for the duration of the open house, it is possible, especially in situations of heavy traffic, that a viewer could enter an area of the house unattended. The registrant on site will do their very best to monitor all visitors at all times, but the seller needs to be aware that the potential for theft or damage does exist. Accordingly, it's recommended that as much as reasonably possible, all valuables, especially small items like jewelry and cash, be put away out of sight, out of access. Okay, so we've covered the requirements for TRESA, for open houses, and for lockboxes. But there's another interesting thing I want to just leave with you on closing. And that is, what about somebody using the lockbox, given access to the lockbox when the registrant is not going to be there? First of all, I would strongly recommend that that never happen. I would like to think that if you're a listing agent and somebody, whether it's somebody that's not registered, it may be the buyer, it may be an appraiser, it may be a home inspector, is going to access that property, make sure you're there. But it's going to come as a surprise to you, but TRESA, RICO under TRESA, actually contemplates the possibility of a non-registrant giving access to the code and attending the property without you being there. Listen to what it says. Agents must not provide a lockbox code to anyone, including a buyer, appraiser, home inspector, or other service provider. I would like it to stop there, but it doesn't. It says without the express written consent of the seller. What are they saying? They're saying, as far as we're concerned, this is RICO speaking now, as far as we're concerned, a buyer, appraiser, home inspector, and some other service provider can go in without you there as long as you've got the written consent from the seller. So, I want to draw your attention to Form 208. It's called Entry, Access to the Property, Seller Acknowledgement. And it's, I would encourage you, First of all, I would encourage you to never allow a non-registered in. I mean, I don't want my buyer meeting with my seller without me there until the deal's closed. I don't want a home inspector, or I don't want an electrician, I don't want an appraiser there without me or the selling agent present. But according to Tressa and according to Form 208, it's actually possible. And if you take a look at Form 208, it's got specific items where it says the seller acknowledges and consents to the entry of the above property for the following purpose. And you can say appraisal, you can say home inspection or whatever. And then it says the brokerage representative to be present during the above access, and it goes on to the listing broker, the cooperating broker, and then it's got an option, neither brokerage representation. So you can actually use this form. Now, bear in mind that it also includes showings. So to use this form, and if you're going to say you use it on a regular basis, technically you would have to use this form every time the property is being shown. You get the express consent from the seller that so-and-so from such and such a company showing the property at such and such a day and such a time. So I want to let you know, don't do that. But if you ever were inclined to because the seller wanted you to for some reason or other, make sure you use 208. I hope that makes sense. Please make use of the consent form. You're welcome to download it and use it. Get used to using it regularly. Make it part of your listing package. And that way you're in compliance with the requirements of RICO under Tressa. Thank you very much for investing your time to watch this video. Talk to you again next week.